Welcome back to the WillPower podcast. My name is William Gomez. I am the host of the show. Today we have Gabe Sherman with us, who is the former chief of staff of NASA for the former administration. I can't wait for you to hear this conversation. We dive into a lot of the personal stuff that he was going through while taking a huge leap of faith, moving to DC, and the great success that he has had. Can't wait for you to hear this conversation. Gabe Sherman, thank you so much for being here on the WillPower podcast, man. I am super pumped to have this conversation with you just because of what I know about you and when you spoke at Church on the Move for the men's breakfast. I mean, that story was just powerful, and I kind of want to dive into that a little bit more. But for people that haven't seen your name before, give us a little 1-minute introduction.
Sure. My name's Gabe Sherman. So, the short version is I spent a lot of time in politics and helped a gentleman named Jim Bridenstine. He was a member of Congress here in the 1st District of Oklahoma. So I helped him get there. And then once we got to Congress, I stayed with him and was his district director and campaign manager. And then we got this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity during the Trump administration to go to NASA and serve in a capacity, serve our country through the nation's space program. And so I took on the role there as deputy chief of staff first, and then moved into the chief of staff role. And so I did that for 3 years during the Trump administration, and it was just an incredible experience. And then after that, got a chance to move back home because Oklahoma is home, and I have my wife and 2 beautiful daughters. My girls are in Owasso schools, and we're just doing life here with our family now.
That's awesome. Yeah. So what are you doing now?
So right now I do consulting work, both on the space side and the political side, if you can imagine that. And there's not a lot of overlap between the two. They're two pretty unique industries. But anything from business development and strategic communications on the space side, and then on the marketing side, again, more strategic communications, marketing work. And so it's every day is a little bit different. Yeah. And very interesting.
So you're still working with Jim, is that his name?
Yeah. Still working with Jim Bridenstine, and also my business partner, Matt Ryden. We have a firm called 39 Bravo. And that's where we do most of our consulting work out of. But yeah, working closely with Jim and just seeing where kind of the space industry is headed, and what core players there need some help. And we jump in and help them in a number of different ways.
So one of the things that I find really interesting is that, I'm a mortgage loan officer by day, right? And I do a little bit of everything that I can get my hands into, right? But being a mortgage loan officer is not something that I was like a little kid and I was like, I want to grow up and be a mortgage loan officer, right? But saying like, I want to grow up and work for NASA, that's one thing that a lot of little kids potentially say more than like your everyday job. Yeah. But for you wanted to grow up and be a baseball player. You're big into baseball.
That's right.
So you had no idea that was going to be even an option for you until literally how long before it happened? Walk me through that.
We're talking months. So yeah, you made it. That's a really, really good point, right? Because as we grow up, we kind of have these ideas of who we're going to be and what we want to be and what we want to grow up into. And I was convinced, man, baseball was going to be my thing. Turns out it wasn't. I got to go on and play in college, and that was a great experience. But after that, then real life started. So I had to go get a job and spent a number of different. I spent seasons of my career doing different things. One of which was in real estate. Right, I was a sales manager for 3 new construction home builders at the time, and so got a very deep appreciation for what you do on a day-to-day basis. And it was really interesting, just kind of the way that God's plan and path came together. To where, no kidding, we had been in Congress for 5.5 years. President Trump wins, and within days, people are speculating, what Jim Bridenstine might do in the administration. And so this crazy idea of NASA came up, that he might be the NASA administrator. It seemed crazy to everybody but us, to be honest. Jim had been kind of the leading voice in Congress on all space issues, national security, civil and commercial. And so it made a lot of sense for him to be considered for that position. And so, I had a really humbling moment there where I'm trying to think about, do I have anything to offer to the nation's space program? Because it's kind of like you said, this is the thing that people grew up dreaming about, working at NASA. So is there anything I could possibly offer to the nation's space program? And fortunately, because of the experiences I've had, I was able to think about it from a communications perspective and take all of the brilliance that's happening at NASA and the tremendous vision that kind of NASA puts out and kind of drives not only the United States but the world by their priorities. And I was able to work with our team and find a way to say, okay, let's communicate effectively. Let's rejuvenate this program or this agency utilizing communications in a very strategic way. And so, man, that was kind of my niche once I got there, and just had a tremendous ride. But it's not hard. You understand when you're getting to communicate about the James Webb Space Telescope or the Mars Perseverance lander, or, hey, we're going back to the moon and we're going to put the first woman and the next man on the moon. Like, those are the types of things where it gets pretty fun to communicate about that. And you don't have to be great when you have a mission it's that incredible, you know?
So I remember you talking and saying that you were so like overwhelmed with like exactly what you said, like, what am I, a kid from Claremore, like going to bring to this, space of people where they're all this high level people, right? But had you ever been more like pretty much like, had you ever been more pretty much scared to dive into something besides that time? Like, or was that pretty much like the number one time that you can remember, like, man, like I've never been this overwhelmed before? Because let me ask you this though, how in your head did you think that, because this only happened because Trump got elected, correct? Mm-hmm. Right. So where were you at because I know the whole country was divided, but where were you at? Like, did you think that like this is going to happen?
So it was really interesting. And so I'll answer both the questions that you gave. Number one, would I have ever considered anything like that being a part of my future? The answer was no. And was it the hardest thing that I'd ever done? Fortunately, I believe God equipped me throughout my entire career to take on new things, take on big challenges, and run into them, figure them out, and execute successfully, and then move on to the next big challenge. And so it wasn't the first time I was going to go into something cold without a tremendous amount of background knowledge and understanding of what the job was going to entail. I could go right back to Congress, like when we won in 2012. Nobody thought we were going to win. It was the first campaign that I'd ever run. And moving into a district director position, I'd never done that job before. And then you go back even further and you say, okay, well, I had never sold homes before. I'd never run or been a part of running the Tulsa Air and Space Museum before. So there's all of these different experiences where you're just walking in to big things and believing that God has equipped you and put you in the right place at the right time with the right people to go out and do something great. And so that had been a part of my story. And so whenever this was an opportunity for me, it was incredibly humbling, don't get me wrong, and daunting. And at the same time, you just have this inner peace knowing, okay, I've done big things before, and each time I've had an opportunity to contribute, and this will be no different. God will open up the doors. He'll show me exactly what I need to do and how I can contribute, not only to the agency at large, but the individuals, the people inside of the agency. And so fortunately, we were able to do a lot of that in 3 years. And I'll tell you, whenever President Trump won, it was not a done deal for us. It was not like, oh, well, this is just a logical next step. This will be easy. There was a tremendous confirmation process that was very, very difficult to navigate and to go through. And there were times throughout the process where it didn't look like it might work out for us. And so it was such a roller coaster of emotions. But I can tell you, there was a steady kind of calm in the background, just knowing the only reason we'd have an opportunity to go there is if God wanted us to be there. And so it was in his hands. And so we just had to take a back seat and let it ride and do the right things and just trust the process. And so it all worked out.
One of the things that I admire you a lot for is when you were sharing that story, you were saying that as I was going through all of these changes and this whole new season of my life, that I was just trusting God that he was going to help me and guide me through this. I had my wife and 2 daughters that were brand new to Virginia, and they were going through, the same, or not maybe worse, because how old are your daughters, or how old were they at the time?
When we moved up there, they were in 5th grade and 7th grade.
I mean, imagine going back to middle school, 7th grade, and not just moving like new schools, but a completely different town like that. Yeah. That's just daunting, right?
Oh man, it was incredible. So we had come from Verdigris, Oklahoma, where Adelie, my oldest, who was a 7th grader, so she had been in the same class with the same people her entire life, and the class was like 30 kids, 40 kids, right? We get to Virginia, and on her first day of school, she's in school with 1,200 kids in her grade. Right?
How big was your class?
So it was like a 1,200 person middle school. So that was 7th and 8th grade. So there were 600, 700 kids in her class. And so you go from 30 to 40 to 700. And so, yeah, man, it was difficult for me, but my kids, like, I think they were by far the bravest part of this entire process. Like they trusted mom and dad to make good decisions. They come to Virginia and they go, and you know what middle school's like. It's not for the faint of heart.
Yeah.
And they just walk into it. And it was not without, pain in that process and difficulty in that process. But man, they were courageous and brave. And you were, I know that you were I don't know if you were at the breakfast, but you got to kind of hear the stories there. And I showed a picture at that breakfast of me just praying with my girls the first day of school. And I had so many guys come up to me after that breakfast, and they're like, man, that picture was just incredibly powerful. To see a dad with their girls praying, and you just see almost the pain and the fear that is in their eyes, and at the same time, a peace that we're locked together as a family, and we're going to walk this out as a family. And so, man, it was a difficult time for them, but I'll tell you, they look back on it now, and they'll be the first ones to tell you it was some of the best time that we had because of the growth and the experiences that we had.
Man, it's crazy that we often forget little things that we go through growing up that stick with us for the rest of our lives. Yeah. And that really shapes us and molds us to who we are today.
That's
like
right.
I can think of the, different things that I went through throughout my life that weren't things that I would ever want like my kid to go through, but it really, I don't think without them, I would be where I'm at. Like you said,
right.
pain, pain, but so many people try to shy away from pain, but I always try to remember, like, where there's pain, there's growth. Like you can't grow without there being any pain, but you don't really, one, most adults don't really see that whenever it's happening. And two, you can't really see that whenever you're that age, but I'm hoping that your daughters, whenever they're, in their late teens or early 20s, that experience is able to kind of help them out through whenever they first get to college and, different scenarios like that. So how many people were you over at NASA?
So whenever I was serving as chief of staff, I had, as far as direct reports go, there was probably 15 to 17 direct reports that I had. But then in that chief of staff role, I've also got a chief of staff community that's spread across the agency. And so that's an additional 30 or 40 people. And then ultimately you're looking at the A suite, the 9th floor at NASA, and you're overseeing 17,000 civil employees and over 60,000 contractors. So whenever you start thinking about the lives that you touch with every decision you make in that leadership office, that 9th floor at NASA, the ripple effects, they don't stay in that building. Like, they're felt across Congress, they're felt across the country, they're felt across the world, because you're making decisions that are affecting international policy. You're making decisions that are affecting congressional funding and programs and jobs. You're making decisions that are going to, no kidding, impact people's lives, that when they're sitting down at their dinner tables in Huntsville, Alabama, they are talking about the decisions that you're making in Washington, D.C. And so whenever you have that kind of weight of responsibility, boy, it is a humbling experience. And I think that's, you mentioned kind of we were talking before, and we were talking about COVID and that impact that made, because we lived that in 2020. And when you're trying to make decisions about people's safety and what's best not only for the country, but what's best for the individuals, can we provide a safe working environment for almost 80,000 people that are looking to us to make good decisions? Oh, and by the way, keep jobs going and keep people paid and keep programs on schedule, so that we aren't, putting the taxpayer in a bad spot by running over cost and running out schedules. I mean, there's so much responsibility there. But again, at the same time, we had a tremendous team. We had tremendous people around us that were helping us navigate each and every one of these decisions. And so, I know if Jim Bridenstine was sitting here right now, he would tell you, if it wasn't for the team, it would have been a really difficult place to be, and we'd have probably made some very poor decisions. But we had a great team that was in it together, and it sure made a difference.
So how long did it take for you to, because correct me if I'm wrong, but you pretty much went from like 0 to 100 with what you were doing here in Oklahoma to going and being over, like you said it, like I'm gonna repeat it backwards. So it was like about 17,000 people that 30 people were over, then that 15 people were over, and then you were over those 15 people, and then it kind of, so like, did you, like, you can probably count in a couple of hands maybe how many people you were, like, I guess, managing or over here when you were doing the, so like, did it ever become normal? Like, I know you said there was a lot of weight in my shoulders, but did it ever become to the point to where you were like, okay, like I'm at peace because this is what I'm called to do? Like, how long did it take for you to transition to feel like this is where I'm supposed to be, and I know that I have what it takes, you know, to be able to lead, you know, all these people?
Man, that's such a good question. And I think whether you're working at NASA or you're an entrepreneur, the answer here matters, right? So whoever's listening, wherever you're at, this answer matters. When you're coming in and you're making that type of adjustment, what you have to understand is, and be very honest, is that you don't know everything on day one, right? There is a lot of growth and learning that you have to do. And if you come into a new position like that and you try and put on a front that you know everything and you've got everything under control and you're going to make all the right decisions right out of the gate, then you risk building credibility, right? You risk your credibility in those moments, and it hurts your ability to lead effectively. And so the way that I approached coming into that was I needed to build relationships first. I was never going to be the smartest engineer in the room at NASA, right? That's impossible. I was never going to be the greatest scientist. I was never going to be the greatest technical guy in the world. But what I could do is I could build relationships. I could communicate effectively. I could listen to people and understand what challenges they were up against, what problems they saw, and some of the plans and directions that we wanted to go were, and really start creating good open lines of communication. So it was months. I mean, it was probably 3-4 months before I started to kind of have an understanding of how this massive agency worked. And then you're months after that before you really start feeling like, okay, I've built enough credibility and I've built enough relationships and I've built a level of understanding now to where I can make decisions and people will follow, right? And it's not a matter, I had to earn that, right? And I think a lot of times we show up as new leaders in organizations and we think because we have a position, people will automatically start following everything that we say and they won't question it. And it's the wrong approach, right? The positional leadership model just doesn't work. And so what I wanted to do very effectively from day one is come in with a humble heart and try and build relationships. Because I knew if we could do that, then we would, it might take us a little bit longer to get up to speed. But once we started to ask people to do very difficult things and make changes, and then, oh, by the way, trust us in the middle of a pandemic, we'd have a foundation there where we could get a lot more done. And so it was, there was a big coming up to speed process. But as long as, I think one of the best things that ever happened to me is just in one of the first few weeks of being at NASA, I'm sitting in a room and I'm looking around, and you've got the chief engineer of NASA in the room. You've got the associate administrator of NASA, which is the highest ranking NASA official. You've got the leader of human exploration and operations. You've got the leader of the science mission directorate and the space technology mission directorate and the aeronautics mission directorate. And these are some of the most brilliant people in the world. And then there's me. And I'm looking around and I'm going, how did I even end up here? And it was, I'll be honest, there had been other people at other times in NASA's history that have come in and started laying down the law immediately. Here's what we're going to do. Here's what you're going to do. And that was just, the agency had a resistance to that. So what we wanted to do was come in and value the people, build relationships, and earn the right to be heard. And so that took time, but putting in the time up front made what we accomplished on the second half of our time there possible.
That's so good, because what you would say that maybe 1 out of 10 leaders or leadership role people go into a place and take that approach.
Yeah.
Because I would say the other 9 come in and just want to establish like dominance pretty much,
right.
Kind of like what you just said that they were doing. And at the end of the day, that can come back and hurt you because people can't really trust you whenever those big, hard decisions, need to be made. So it's funny that you just told me kind of like all these people that you were around, because I remember at the breakfast you spoke that on one of the meetings you went and where did you go, like SpaceX or something? Is that what it's called? Mm-hmm. And you met Elon was there and everything. So I'm sure that you were around like some pretty high up people to where how intimidating did that feel? Or did it feel intimidating at all? And then how long did that also take kind of, how much time did it take to get used to as well too, for you to be able to kind of like, still be in your role and not have to, maybe feel like you're walking on eggshells or you're going to do something wrong. Tell me a little bit about that.
Sure. So, the DC game is one where everybody wants to be seen with the power players or be seen as a power player, right? And so the space industry, there's a lot of that can kind of accompany that. And so, you look at going down, you're referencing Demo 2, whenever we kind of returned human spaceflight to American soil on American rockets, with American astronauts. And so we're down there, we're getting ready for this big launch. And yeah, you're going through these individual meetings and you're sitting down with the Elon Musks of the world, having conversations about the technology and where we are in the process and what the launch looks like and how are our astronauts doing. And so you're having these conversations, and it's very easy to get enamored with big personalities, with big jobs, with big responsibilities, with being known, with being seen. And I think a lot of people fall into that trap. And, I think there have been times in my career where I wanted to be one of those guys, right? But once you're able to kind of take a step back and adjust priorities and look at that for what it is, and kind of make a determination for yourself on who it is that you want to be, not just where you want to be and what you want to be known for and how you want people to see you, and you're going to make different decisions. And so that was something that was very, I think, good for me. Is I had some great mentors in my life very early on that kind of smacked me upside the head and said, "You're not as good as you think you are," because I've had a chance. I've just been around some great people and had some great opportunities, so I experienced early success. And I've had mentors be like, "Bro, you're just not as good as you think you are." And so sometimes you need those people in your life. And when that happens to you early in your career and you start to adjust, then whenever you get ready for some of these bigger opportunities, I think you're more likely to have the right mentality going in. Because so much of DC is the power game. And fortunately for me, I come from Verdigris, Oklahoma, right? So I could come into that, even having been exposed to the hill and spent time up there, and come in with, I think, a little different perspective. And I'll be the first to tell you, I don't always get it right. But falling into that trap, that was not a trap for me, right? I didn't have to worry about trying to become one of the guys that needs to be in the room. I would much rather be the guy that's removing roadblocks, that's setting people up to win, that's setting direction, and that's ensuring that the mission we're trying to achieve is actually moving forward, than be a guy in a room just so that I could be, with the cool kids.
That's so important, because you even though you weren't trying to be one of those guys or make sure that you were always around those guys, that, you spoke a little bit about how even that still kind of took a little bit of your identity, mm-hmm. right? And it's crazy sitting across from you right now and talking about this, and how even though you weren't, trying to achieve these, even higher places, but that's still part of the world that you were in still kind of felt weird whenever that all went away. Mm-hmm. But it's, everybody else, even including before we sat down, we were talking about how I had, an injury of, rupturing my Achilles. And I felt that I had this thing to live up to of like, even though I do enjoy, working out, I enjoy doing all the things. I kind of, when this happened, and dude, I couldn't walk for, I think like 2 months. Yeah. And kind of, and especially sitting there, like at least whenever, you put in your resignation and you left, like you were at least doing things maybe with your family to where you can kind of get your mind away. Like I was sitting at home, forced to kind of be with my own thoughts and think like, man, like, was I leaning too much on my athletics and all this different things to be my identity, rather than like, who am I going to be now?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's so crazy to hear you say that you weren't even trying to achieve those things as much as maybe everybody else around you was, but you still experienced that. How
100%.
How long did it take you, do you think, to finally feel like, man, like this is God telling me like that my identity is not in what I do? Yeah. Like you spoke a little bit about that, but how long did it fully take you?
It's a great question. So I'm a big believer in that what we do is not who we are, right? Big believer. And I think that we as men especially, we do a really poor job of this. We wrap so much of who we are into what we do, into what we have accomplished or what we make or what we want to become, that it drives our identity. And it's amazing when some of those things get taken away, what happens to people. And for me, why I didn't want to be the important guy in the room, and I wasn't trying to be seen with all the right people. There was a cool factor and a big piece of my identity of being a guy that works at NASA and being the guy that was the deputy chief of staff and then became the chief of staff. And you have these titles and so you're working and whenever you have those titles, man, you're in an administration where every single day you're making big decisions or you're influencing big decisions. It might be international relationships and our space policy with our international partners. It might be on the commercial space side of things and what we're doing with SpaceX or Boeing or Northrop Grumman or Blue Origin or any of these other space companies that are out there. It might be on the congressional side of things where you're sitting down and you're meeting with senators and you're meeting with members of Congress and you're meeting with their staff and lobbyists from different companies. And so, you're in the middle of all of this important stuff all the time. And it feels like every decision you're making is the most important decision. And then all of a sudden, boom, that stops. And for me, there was an election. I'm grateful for our country and the elections that we have and man, the peaceful transition of power that we have. And so on January 20th, 2021, my time at NASA was over at noon, right? At noon, it stopped. And so no kidding, I told the story at the breakfast at 11:58, I'm on a phone call with a guy who's running our interagency and international affairs. And we are talking, no kidding, about an Artemis Accords country that we're trying to get to sign on to the Artemis Accords so that they're agreeing to norms of behavior in space, which is kind of how you preserve the peaceful uses of space. And so we're having this discussion at 11:58, and at 12:01, I'm done, right? Nobody cares anymore about Gabe's opinion or what Gabe thinks about, that thing or the important congressional thing or the White House thing. All of it's gone. And at 12:01, I find myself standing in my kitchen, just emotional and having my oldest daughter come up to me and I just hugged her and said, "Hey man, I no longer work at NASA. Am I still cool?" And she's like, "Shut up, Dad. You were never cool." But it's one of those moments where you're suddenly not that person anymore.
Yeah.
And in those moments, whether it's chief of staff at NASA or entrepreneur, business owner, it makes no difference. When we tie something of our identity so much into a title or a responsibility, or a desire, when that thing goes away, then you have to answer real questions. And what happens for a lot of people is that's where I call it identity crisis, right? That's where we fall into an identity crisis where we are trying to figure out who we are. And when we don't know who we are and we don't know what we're chasing, we can make some terrible decisions. And you see broken families that come from this. You see broken individuals that come from this. You see broken businesses that come from this. Because somebody in leadership in a particular role has lost their identity and now they're flailing and they're making poor decisions. And when that happens, people get hurt. And so what I've found and what I found throughout that process, man, is I've got to make sure that my identity is wrapped up in one place. And that's who I am in my Heavenly Father and who He created me to be. And if my identity's there, then the jobs can change, the responsibilities can change. But man, I'm locked in on who I am in Him. And I think that's the strongest position, specifically as men, that's the strongest position you can take because life is going to be uncertain, right? There will always be a level of uncertainty and change. And if we do a poor job placing our identity in the wrong things, man, then when they change, we don't know what to do. And that can lead you down a dark path. So, man, it was a big lesson learned for me in that process.
Had you ever experienced anything like that before?
Sure. I think there was the moment whenever I was no longer going to be a baseball player, right? That was a thing. And then you're trying to figure out, well, I've been going to school to play baseball. What am I going to school for now? So that was a really big thing. And then you look at other points in my life where whether it was a job change or a title change, there was a moment where I was working for one company and I was trying to run the congressional campaign and I had to step away from that company. I just had to try and figure out like how to pay bills. And here I am in the middle of, I was early in my 30s and here I am trying to figure this stuff out where I'm looking at other people, buddies of mine that are in their mid 30s. Dude, they're making, 150 a year. They're doing all this stuff. And here I am I'm like flailing about just trying to keep a campaign afloat and try and put food on the table. And it can, if my identity is too wrapped up in all of those other things, and I can get really, really down really quick. But I just knew in that moment that God had a plan and he was working. And so I was able to navigate through that process without going off the rails or feeling like I'm worthless or I lack value because I wasn't making a lot of money at that time. God had a completely different plan for me. And whenever I was able to focus on it and walk through it, then you end up working at a place like NASA. Had I chased some of the things that I wanted to chase because I thought I needed them or I thought they defined me more, I'd have missed out on so many experiences that God had planned for me. So I just had to be patient in those times and not question my identity in him and try and wrap it up in something else.
You said something that I never really thought about. You hear that saying, comparison is the thief of joy, right? You're doing your thing, whatever it is, whether you're working at NASA or whether you're playing college baseball and, whatever you're doing. But as soon as you look to the left, you look to the right, it seems like you become dissatisfied on what it is that you're doing. But I never really thought about it this way, that whenever you're comparing yourself, you're really lacking confidence in your identity, which is something that you should never do, because if your identity is truly in Christ, then that should never happen.
Here's the worst part, okay? And this I had a mentor help me think through this. But here's the worst. What are you saying to God in that moment? If what you're saying to God if you are sitting here and you are comparing yourself to everybody else around you and you aren't measuring up, you aren't making as much money, you don't have as big a house, you don't have the title, you don't have this, what are you saying to God in that moment? Basically what you're telling him in that moment is, Lord, you aren't doing enough for me, right? You haven't put me in the right places. Or, hey, I'm not happy with where you've put me, God. And so what we're doing in those moments is we are trading the plan and the path that God has for us for our own. And so we're trading what God can see from an eternal perspective for what we see looking to our left and our right. Like whenever you say it out loud, it's stupid.
Yeah.
But whenever you're in it, it doesn't seem stupid. It seems, you ask all the questions. Why haven't I gotten here? Why is this not happening for me? I'm working so hard. How come I'm not progressing? But man, if we can just take a step back for a second and say, Lord, what are you trying to teach me in this moment? Where are you trying to move me, and how are you trying to grow and shape me? Then we can get to a very different place. And I had a great mentor named Dave Jewett who has a ministry called Your One Degree. That's just incredible. And he's helped so many men. And there was a time where I was walking through a situation like this where I'm trying to figure out, like, man, Lord, am I doing this right? Have I missed you? I mean, what is happening? And he told me something that I'll never forget. He said, Gabe, you're right on time. You're right on time. And in that moment, dude, I was just wrecked, because what he was telling me is, man, you're right where God wants you. Why are you trying to move out of this? Why are you trying to go over here, or look for answers other places? Will you just understand you're right on time, and that God's working in you, and he's got a plan and a purpose, that you're his son, that your identity is wrapped up in him? You're right on time. Just let him work. And so often what we try and do is get way out ahead of him or question his plan. And we have such a narrow view of everything that's going on around, and we're willing to trade his eternal perspective in a heartbeat for what we can see. And that's just crazy when you say it out loud.
Yeah, and I'm a big analogy guy, and I think that I've heard people say that, like, God's never late, he's never early, he's right on time, right? But I think of, and I'm specifically guilty of this, of any new place that I'm going where there is I'm using my GPS, right? And you're constantly trying to beat that time. It says you're going to get there right at 6 or 6:01. And you're like, how can I get there at 6 or 5:58, 5:59, right? And no matter what you do, even at times where it seems that you're going to get there early, you end up 99% of the time getting there right when the GPS told you we were going to get there. Yeah. And I think that that's how a lot of us live our life, that we think like we can just beat that time, but it's even after time and time again, whenever we are proven that it's not it's not our time, like we try to, right? Yeah. So one of the questions I have for you is, I'm curious, I'm a big believer that you are who you surround yourself with, right? So you're in DC and you're surrounding yourself with these, like, high up people. Mm-hmm. And you are leaving Claremore, Verdigris, Owasso here, which is like the Bible Belt, right? Mm-hmm. And the Trump administration say, they claim that they're really, Christian people, right? But like, I'm assuming you're going to be with it's going to be really different to where like there you're around like really smart, high up people, but maybe it's, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm assuming that maybe it's lacking a little bit of like in the faith aspect to where when you come over here, maybe you traded that for maybe being around more people that were a little bit more faith, base, more strong in their faith. So am I assuming that correctly? And then if so, then talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah. Such a good question. So I'll tell you a story about my youngest daughter, right? So she was in 5th grade when we moved up there, and she got invited to her first birthday party, which was a huge deal, right? Like you're trying to make new friends, and getting invited to a birthday party was a big deal in 5th grade. And so, man, she was so excited. And it was this skating rink birthday party, and they were going to skate, they were going to bowl, they were going to do a number of things. And Amanda and I, my wife, we go out there, and we're kind of just hanging out, meeting some parents. And I shook one of the parents' hand, and she said, "Oh, who's your daughter?" And I said, "Gabby." And she goes, "Oh my gosh, she's the one that wears the Jesus t-shirts." And I thought, well, yeah, she is. But it was something that just blew them out of the water. Like
they've never seen anything like that.
They're like, the girl who wears like if you went to Owasso, elementary, and you were looking around to find, you probably see plenty of girls running around in a Jesus t-shirt. But man, she was all alone. Like, oh, she's the one that wears the Jesus t-shirts. It was something that stood out. It was nothing we would have ever considered living here in Oklahoma. So that just gives you a glimpse. So a very different culture, right? It's a melting pot up there, a lot of different religions, a lot of different perspectives. And then, like you said, you go into DC and you work at the world's leading science and space agency. And so, yeah, there's a lot of different viewpoints, a lot of different perspectives. But I'll tell you what was great is I never once felt like I was being persecuted for my faith working at NASA. Never once. And I always had there was more affirmation than anything else. But it was unique in that whenever I'm in Oklahoma and I've had a number of my jobs, all of my coworkers basically are Christians, right? But man, you go up to NASA and that's not the case. And so whenever you'd find out that somebody was a Christian, that they went to church, it was like, hey man, we need to hang out. And so before long, we had a Bible study going, a NASA Bible study, and that was fun. And it was just really interesting to see how God brought the right people into your path at the right time. And we had some really good friends up there that were able to kind of show us biblical community and what that looked like, and taught us lessons that we're using at our church today. And so, yeah, a very different place, not the Bible Belt. But I'll tell you, God brings the right people into your path at the right time to give you the affirmation that you need, the encouragement that you need, and that was fun to see. It was also a level of responsibility, right? I think sometimes we get very comfortable in places like Oklahoma, and we don't realize just how much of a responsibility we have to honor God's kingdom in no matter what it is that we're doing, and that people are looking at you. And whenever you're acting different, they're asking the question, why is that person acting a specific way? And I remember one time there was one of my direct reports, and she's a dear friend and care about her. And she and I we had some differences on some personnel issues and some things that we were looking at. And I caught myself. I was communicating to her in a way that was not in alignment with who I wanted to be. And she and I were sitting down in my office, and I think the Holy Spirit just hit me, and it was just like, man, hold on. I'm not the person I need to be right now. I'm acting like I'm some sort of big timer. Like I needed a check, and that was a great check for me. Where sometimes I think we get going and running so fast in some of those situations, and whether you're in Oklahoma or DC, the same thing happens. We're trying to get things done, and if we aren't aware of how we're communicating and how we're projecting ourselves, we can hurt our testimony and hurt our witness. And fortunately, I was able to ask for her forgiveness and work through some things and be stronger on the other side. And so we have a heavy responsibility as Christians to lead and to build relationships in a way that point people back to Him.
That's really good. Did you think that coming back over here and being kind of back in the Bible Belt, you also maybe had a little bit harder time like adjusting maybe, or at least recognizing that you were just with people that were maybe feeding you quite a bit of, great, knowledge. And, like last year, for example, I I believe I traveled, it was close to like 15 places, going to different masterminds, going to different conferences, because I was like, if I want to grow and learn from other people, like I'm going to have to, get out of here for a little bit and then come back. Did you have a hard time adjusting to that or anything?
Going up there, the adjustment was, man, I've grown up in a church. I'm leading men's ministries, discipleship ministries, young family ministries. I have these communities that I belong to, and then suddenly you don't, right? And that was difficult. And I was trying to figure out, like, okay, Lord, what do I need to do? My reaction was to go to a new place and immediately start trying to do all of those things. So I need to find a men's ministry and see what I can do to help out. I need to find a young families class and see if I can help teach. I need to serve. That's what I've been doing. I need to figure that out here. And so whenever we went up there was this moment where it's like, okay, wait a minute. The mission's changed. You and your family have now moved a couple thousand miles across country. Your girls don't know anybody. Your wife doesn't know anybody. Your mother-in-law's up here with you. This is a different season. And so the service side of things that was so much of my life here in Oklahoma shifted up there to, how am I going to take care of the spiritual health of the people that are closest to me? And so that took me a little bit of time to kind of work through and to understand that the mission had changed, and that spiritually the mission had changed. It wasn't just a job change and a location change. It was a spiritual mission change. And so what we did, we started doing things that we had never done before. We started collectively, as me, Amanda, Adelie, and Gabby, sitting down at our table on Wednesday nights and going through Bible studies together and looking at things. Instead of rushing to a Wednesday night service where I'm teaching, I was sitting down at home with the four of us, working through a Bible study, taking care of the spiritual health of my kids and my wife and us. And so that season just shifted and changed. And it was something where at first I didn't know what to do with it. Mm-hmm. And then later on, it became one of the sweetest parts of the season was that spiritual growth as a family. And I think sometimes we as men, we'll get so caught up on the service side or the ministry side where we're trying to take care of a lot of other things. We'll overlook our primary responsibility, which is the spiritual health of our kids and our wife and our marriage. And so there were times there where I got to really focus in on that. And then God brought some people into our life where we could experience community differently, more intimately than maybe I had, here where I was trying to take care of so many different folks. And so that was a really good thing. And so then you flip and you come back. I don't live too far from where I lived whenever we moved, and I'm right back into the church that I was at before we left. And the expectation is, and even from me, the expectation moving back was, well, I'm just going to need to jump right back into all of these things. And I had to take a minute and say, okay, Lord, the season was different up there. You wanted different things from me. I've made the mistake up there of just trying to jump in and do a bunch of stuff. Now I'm coming back. Let's take a pause here and say, what is it that you want? It's not just all of the same things. It's something different. And so, man, it's been the spiritual growth in this process, has been really, really good. And at the same time, man, it didn't come easy, right? There were plenty of mistakes that I made. And as you kind of said earlier, some of the learning, some of our best learning comes from when we've made mistakes or there's pain involved. And so some of that has been true even on the spiritual side of things.
That's really good, man. And I just want to say thank you again for coming on. I don't think that you were on whenever you said it, but you don't do this quite a bit, and I really appreciate you taking the time. That's one of the things that I always tell people is that time is something you can't ever get back. So I really appreciate you coming on. One of the last questions I always like to ask is and this is just asking from me to you, and then I hope that anybody listening is able to take something from it. But what is the best advice that you learned while you were out there that got you through that season?
Man, that's so good. So I'll give you a couple different things from a couple different perspectives, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So from the leadership side of things, I would tell you that you need a framework that you really believe in. You need a personal definition of leadership and a framework of what good leadership looks like that you internalize and own, so that no matter what situation you're placed into, you can be effective from day one. It doesn't mean you have to have all the answers from day one, but there needs to be a way about the way that you go about leadership and what you believe good leadership to be needs to be so ingrained in you that no matter where you're put and no matter what the responsibilities and no matter what the mission, you know what you're going to do as a leader. And that was something that I learned throughout this process. I define leadership as a process of influence. that effectively is accomplished through others to achieve a predetermined goal, right? So it's a process of influence where you are influencing others to achieve a determined goal. And so that to me was really important. And it's something that I kind of learned and started to hang on to throughout this process. And so I kind of go by this lead, develop, care framework. So there's kind of 3 primary responsibilities for a leader: that you need to lead your people, right? You need to understand what the goal is. You need to be invested in developing your people, and you need to care for your people. And if you can do those 3 things, then you can really do some good stuff. And Terry Cook wrote a great book called Lead, Develop, Care that has just been something so good for me. So that's what I would say on the leadership side. Know what leadership is, know what good leadership is, and know how you're going to lead from day one. Spiritually, I would say, when you're making these types of moves, and you've got to be in a place where, number one, you are so locked in to who he is and what he wants to accomplish for you that takes priority over what you want and what you think you need. And so if we can get to that position and not predetermine what those lessons learned are going to be, or what steps we need to take, where we give room to the Holy Spirit to work, to show us, to grow us, to lead us, to develop us into the people that we need to be through the process, and then we're going to reap some really good spiritual growth and rewards through it. And so I would just tell anybody moving into any new situations, don't predetermine what those things are going to be, and be wide open to what God wants to do for you. And then I would say personally, again, I think the identity piece just cannot be overstated. Your identity is locked in him first, not in what you do, not in where you are, not in what you've been asked to do, or the titles you've been given, or the money that you're making. You find your identity in Christ first. And if that's the starting point, then so many of the other things, your priorities, your actions, your behaviors will kind of take care of themselves. And so that foundation, I think, is so critical. So that's leadership, spiritual, and personal there.
Man, I think people are going to have a good competition there on any advice that they give. That was probably some of the best that I've had on, and I really, really appreciate you. Do you normally do speaking engagements, or was that just that one time at the church?
I do, and I'll be doing more
here,
hopefully in the weeks and months to come. So yeah, man.
There we go. So if people want to find you, where can they find you?
Yeah, best place to find me is probably LinkedIn right now. My page is a little outdated. I've got some updates to do, but that's a good place.
Don't
to
tell
find
me you still have the COVID mask on.
I do not. I have a great picture of me talking, right? But no, so that's a great place to find me. And then of course, I can give you email addresses and all of that good stuff.
There we go. Well, I appreciate you, man. Thank you for coming on again.
You bet. Thank you.